everyone, and welcome to my home here at the Red Brick House. Today I'm going to share with you a project that I started last summer and I'm just now finishing it up. So this project started as a way to use up my scrap yarn, and also I really needed a summer throw blanket that I could put on the back of my couch. As you guys know, I have 3 cats. And we like to put blankets up there because, you know, cats tend to sleep up there all the time, right? And it's just a good way to protect your furniture. And I had old blankets that I've used in the past, but I really wanted something new and fresh and bright and colorful for the summertime. And I didn't have anything like that. And I did know that I had quite a lot of leftover cotton yarn from different projects. And so I thought that it would be fantastic to have a granny square blanket with a floral kind of theme. I wanted to make it look like the granny squares were flowers. I know that there's other crocheted flowers that are actual flower shaped, but I did want this to be a granny square blanket because granny squares just scream summer to me. I don't know why. Maybe that's really not a thing, but for me, I feel like it's very summery. I think because it has all the holes and things in it. I don't know. Anyway, I thought that would be really beautiful for my couch. And so I set out to start making these squares. Now, I just made these squares during my downtime, in between my videos. Whenever I had a few minutes where I wasn't doing anything, I would just sit down and work on them. And you know, it doesn't take very long to make one granny square. So typically I would make maybe 2 or 3 at a time and then just put them on the shelf. And then next time I had some free time, I would just make a few more. And I just kept collecting them until I had used up pretty much all of my cotton yarn. The only thing I had left over was a little bit of the yellow. And so my design for these squares was to have yellow in the center and then a color around it for the flower. And then I had this like kind of neon green that I had bought to make Christmas towels, and I never made them. So I had quite a bit of this green, and I thought that would be bright and colorful, and maybe it would represent, in my mind, it would represent leaves around the flower. And then as a border, I had this darker green, and so I wanted that to be kind of the mesh that held it all together, so maybe it would look kind of like flowers in a field of grass or something. And so once I finished all of my granny squares and I had used up all my yarn, now comes the time to decide how big it's going to be and the shape that I wanted and try to start putting it together. And I knew that I wanted a rectangular shape because I wanted it to go on the couch. And I knew that I wanted rows of squares, kind of like, I thought of it kind of like a quilt block, you know, like when you're putting quilt blocks together. That's how I wanted it to go together. And so I started counting up all of my granny squares, and I had 80 exactly. I don't know how I did that, but it was so lucky that it ended up being an even number like that, because for a rectangle, I could just do 8 by 10, or, you know, and that would be 80, an area of 80 squares. And so my crafting math here, I had 10 rows of 8 squares. And so that's how I decided on how, you know, the finished size of what it was going to be like. And so next I started putting those squares together in rows. And like I said, just like you would do quilt blocks, I designed them out. Now this is the fun part of designing, right? I love to design things. And so I wanted this to look very random but structured at the same time. I did not want 2 of the same color together. I also noticed that when I had all of my blocks kind of set out in front of me, I could tell that I had a lot more white flowers than I did other colors. And so I knew that I was going to have to incorporate the white more often, and then I could see I had other colors I had a lot less of, and I knew that those colors were going to need to be more spread out because I didn't have as many. And so then I started to just put them in a row. So I just laid the colors out to how I thought they looked pretty, and I did 1 row at a time. And after I finished the first row, I kind of designed them out the next way. So it's random, but it's very thought out. So maybe it's not random, really. I guess. But I wanted it to look random, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So I worked on the next row, and I just did row by row by row, and in that way, and I really started to love how it was coming together. So that brings me to sewing the rows together. Now, I don't know about you guys, but when I crochet and I put things together, I tend to stick with the same method that works for me throughout all my projects. I don't really vary and try different types of joins. There's lots of different ways to join granny squares, and you can find that information all over YouTube. And so this is just the way I do it. I've done it this way as a child because that's how my mom taught me to join things together. And I'm just sewing through the inside loop of the chain stitch on each piece of, I don't know what to call it. It's not fabric. It kind of is fabric, I guess. I'll call it that. On each set, you know, each side of the things that you're trying to put together. I just sewed into one side and out the other, and that works really well for me. And that's how I put these together. Now, it was very tricky when I got to the corners of the squares where they were joining the next row in the corner of the squares. I had a lot of trouble trying to figure out how to do that. This is my first time making a granny square blanket, so don't judge me too harshly, but I tried the first method. It didn't work out. It was very gappy and holey, and I didn't like it. And so I tried it again, and it worked, but it didn't look that pretty. And so I ended up doing like kind of a double stitch. I would kind of stitch underneath some stitches and then over the top, and it still didn't, it worked at the time, but it didn't really solve my problem. I'm sorry if the camera's shaking. My cat is walking around and he's bumping the camera. Hopefully he will lay down now. Speaking of this cat, he loves this blanket, by the way. I think it's his new favorite thing. But anyway, so I finally came across a method of kind of putting those corners together, but as the blanket got longer, it got heavier. And I noticed, because it is cotton, it does stretch, and it kind of started pulling apart at those corner joins. And so I am really looking for a better way to join those. I think if I was going to do it again, I would really do some research on how other people put those, put granny square blankets together. But anyway, I think it still turned out okay. So after I had all of my rows together, I wanted to put a nice little edging around the edge because it just looked a little bit plain on the edges. I just did a simple single crochet stitch all the way around the blanket, and I did that 2 times. And then I did my favorite edging ever. If you've seen some of my other crochet videos, you know it's my favorite. But I just do like a scallop edge on the very end. So 2 rounds of single crochet, and then I did a round of the scalloped edge, which is where I do 3 double crochets into 1 stitch, and then I count over 2, put a slip stitch into the 3rd stitch, and that completes the scallop, and then you just start over again. And I think it's really pretty, so let's take a look at the final product here. Here it is. I think it's so beautiful. And I hope I don't sound like I'm like bragging or anything, because I don't mean to be, but I do love how it turned out, because this is exactly what I was picturing in my head, and I think that's why I like it so much. So I hope that you've enjoyed this video. I hope that you have gotten some ideas maybe, and this is how I put all this together. And even though it looks very summery right now, that it's fall time, I don't care. I'm still gonna use it anyways. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.